Um, so thank you everybody for coming this evening. This will be recorded and shared through YouTube, but I hope that doesn't stop anybody from asking questions. If you have questions, I strongly encourage you to unmute yourself and ask. I will try to monitor the chat, but I am not the best at multitasking, and so I may miss questions that are posted there. So just don't be bashful. Go ahead and jump on in. So tonight we're going to talk about resumes. And chances are good that, share this, chances are good that you have at some point been told how to create a resume, maybe by somebody at Career Services or something like that. We're going to focus tonight specifically on a resume that you would use in an application for law school. There are about 1 million different ways to write a resume. There are some conventions that are kind of important for law school resumes, and so that's my focus tonight. Okay. So the most fundamental question is what to put on your resume. Include your name, obviously. I strongly encourage you to provide your location, where you live, like Denton, Texas. You do not have to provide your street address. No one's going to look for you. This isn't a job application, and in fact, you're going to be submitting applications to law schools that include your street address. So it doesn't necessarily need to be on your resume, but basic contact information is a good idea. So a phone number, if you want them to be able to contact you via telephone, and your email address. Definitely lead with your education. I say this in a lot of contexts, but you are effectively applying for a job as a student. So the number one qualification you have is your student record. Sometimes when you apply for a job, you may list your work experience first and then put your education under that. You should always lead with your education for this type of resume. Definitely mention any honors and awards and scholarships you've received. We'll talk a bit about that in a minute. If you happen to have publications or presentations, you can include those as well. Your work experience, your leadership and service experience. So this would be certainly things on campus, but it would also include volunteer work in your community or political participation. For example, if you're a member of if you're a precinct captain for your political party, or if you do volunteer work for your church, if you lead Sunday school, something like that, you would want to include that as well. And then special skills and interests. We'll dig into these a little bit more specifically. So with respect to your education, on the one hand, you want to lead with your education. It is the most important thing, but don't bother listing your high school. If you're applying sort of for a work job or for an employment position, and you are a recent college graduate, you're sometimes encouraged to include your high school information. You absolutely do not want to do that for a law school application. They know you graduated from high school, and really, no matter how fantastic you were as a high school student, what they care about is your ability to do college level work. You definitely want to list all of the schools from which you earned a degree. And you may want to also list other schools. For example, if you started at a community college, or if you did dual credit in high school. While you do not want to list your high school experience, it's okay to list the community college that gave you dual credit because that was college credit. Or maybe you did a summer abroad somewhere and a foreign institution oversaw that program. You can certainly list them as well. But you always want to include the school, the location, very important because sometimes there are multiple campuses or multiple schools that have the same name, the years you attended, the degrees you completed or that you are expecting to complete, majors, minors, certificates, your GPA, and then again, honors and awards. So if you graduated already and you graduated cum laude, you certainly want to mention that. If you were on the dean's list, if you were an Emerald Eagle Scholar, sort of any of those notations, those things that your mom and dad want to put in the Christmas newsletter, or that your favorite teacher always brings up. Those are the things you want to include. Couple of questions that I get a lot about the education section. One is what to do if you haven't graduated yet. How do you list your dates? I suggest indicating when you expect to get your degree. On the one hand, that's going to be on your application, but it's kind of the norm to just include degree expected May of 2021, for example. Well, not anymore, May of 2022. If you didn't receive a degree from an institution, for example, if you started at Tarrant College and you went there for a couple of semesters and then to UNT, you can still list Tarrant College, and I would just indicate how many credit hours you received. Okay. Again, honors, awards, and scholarships. You can either sort of roll that into the education portion of your sort of the education section of your resume. So just list it underneath the individual schools. Or if there are a lot of them, you may want to pull it out and sort of highlight it as a separate section on your resume. One thing that I really encourage people to do is to mention or to explain how you were chosen for some of the awards that you receive. So for example, Emerald Eagle Scholars here at UNT, we know what those are, but if you're applying to a law school, even in Texas, they may have no idea what that program is. So it's not a bad idea to include a bullet point to say, this is how I was chosen. This is what it meant. This is what I had to do to keep that scholarship. You want, because the reason that you list the scholarships is that it's a sign of accomplishment. And in order for law schools to understand how big that accomplishment is, they need to understand the context. And then if you list things like Dean's List or President's List, good idea to include the list of semesters in which you were given those honors. That's true whether it was just one semester, right? Just like fall of 2021, or if it were a lot of semesters, you certainly want to draw attention to that as well. Pause before we move on to work, service, and leadership. Any questions so far? Yeah, excellent. Okay, so work, service, leadership. I'm lumping all of these together here. We'll talk a bit about whether or not you should lump them together on your resume or not. But generally speaking, for all of these sections, actually for education as well, you want to list things in reverse chronological order. So the top entry is the most recent. So for example, if you have a job right now, that will be the #1 entry under work. And then you go back in time. It's a good idea to list the employer, the location. It's not absolutely essential to list the location. So if you worked at Chipotle, you don't necessarily have to say that it was in Denton, Texas, but it's not a bad idea to do that and to list the dates of employment and the position that you hold or held. And then you want to always include for work, for service responsibilities, or for leadership, you always want to have at least 2 bullet points that identify what you did, right? And we'll look at some examples of this, but you want to lead with action verbs. You want to talk about, I trained, well, don't say I, trained fellow servers, maintained records, communicated policies, etc. So you want to lead with the verb. For jobs or positions that you hold now, use present tense because you're doing those things now. And if you don't hold the job anymore, then you want to use past tense. So you do want to be very careful about that and about the way that you write those things. Another thing that I often suggest, especially for my students at UNT, so many of my UNT students have multiple jobs, or they're working full time while they're going to school full time. So your resume may look very different than a SMU who has everything covered and is able to be a member of 18 different organizations. So one of the reasons that you include your work experience on a resume for law school is to show that you are able to manage a lot of time commitments and that you're able to manage a lot of responsibilities. So I encourage you to indicate roughly how many hours a week. I think that provides some important context. There's nothing wrong with having a job where you only work 5 or 10 hours a week. That's totally fine. But particularly if you have a job where you're working 15, 20, 30, 40 hours a week, I think it's important that law schools know that. It provides some context for your grades. It provides some context for the rest of your resume, etc. I also encourage people to write these explanations, these bullet points, keeping in mind that the person reading your resume probably knows nothing about the job that you are describing. So you want to avoid using jargon. The example I have, I worked a lot of food service, so much food service in my life. So I know what side work is. I know that that's combining ketchup bottles and rolling silverware, but a lot of people don't know what side work is. So you want to instead assume that the person does not know what those words mean and be more specific about what it is that you did. Questions? Okay. That is okay.
Dr. Watson, I actually had a question.
Yeah.
So what if in your work experience you have a large gap because of disability? In my situation, I was in a car accident, so I physically couldn't do the job anymore. And then I immediately, as soon as I was able to, get back to school to get a different degree. Do we need to explain? Because I know on work applications usually explain for a long time period of work gaps.
So for it kind of depends a little bit on if there's a gap where you were, I don't want to say doing nothing because obviously you were recovering, but where you were not employed outside of the home, you were not doing any volunteer work, you were not in school, where kind of your time is completely unaccounted for. Or, and this could be because of a disability or because you were raising children or any number of things. Sometimes it's hard for your resume to reflect that. And the easier thing to do is to not worry about it on the resume at all, but instead write an addendum. The addenda that you can attach to your applications can cover a whole host of things that need to be explained. They're sort of your opportunity to say, hey, wait a minute, when you look at this, here's what's going on. So if you, for example, I actually was talking to somebody who transferred not very long ago. And as a result, between COVID and transferring, they have no extracurricular activities through no fault of their own, right? They just don't have any. They couldn't work because of COVID and transferring and moving, and they couldn't really maintain any activities at school because of those things also. So writing an addendum is a good way to explain those things. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
I do encourage people to include a section at the end of their application, at the end of their resume, where they identify any special skills or interests that you have. Sometimes people want to, sort of be general in their skills that they mention, like teamwork. And while teamwork is an incredibly valuable skill to have, it's not really something that you can self-identify as having, right? Instead, these are more concrete things that you could demonstrate, that you could get like a certification in. Not that you necessarily have to have one, but for example, if you know software, like if you're really adept with Photoshop, or if you know how to program, or if you speak a language or read a language, include those things. Then I would also encourage you to list a couple of things that you're interested in. It's not essential, but you'd be amazed at how those things like photography or bread baking or travel can provide a connection to somebody who's on the admissions committee. And again, it gives them a sense of who you are, right? It's a way to demonstrate how you choose to spend your time. There's no sort of right or wrong answer. There's no like a good thing or a bad thing, but it lets them see your personality, right? I have a friend who runs ultra marathons. I do not. I consider it a major accomplishment if I walk to the corner store. So, she's going to put ultra marathoning on her resume, and I'm going to put baking bread and making pasta on mine. There's no right answer there, but you definitely get a very clear sense of who we are as people. And it's a very accurate interpretation.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So back to what the previous girl was saying about a gap year. So, I spoke to you previously, but basically, so I'm graduating a year early this spring, and then I'll have like a year off, and I'll just be studying for my LSAT and applying to schools. So, like, would I need to write an addendum for that, or would that be like self-explanatory because they'll see like me testing for my LSAT?
So keep in mind that if you are applying, let's say you're graduating this spring, you are applying to start fall of 2023.
Yeah.
You're not going to have a whole year's gap when you write this resume. You're probably going to be writing this resume in November. So it's only going to be a few months. Right. So it's not going to be as noticeable. If you take a whole year off to study for the LSAT and then like down the road apply, then yeah, I actually would write an addendum to explain that. That's awesome that you get to take time to study. That's great. Okay. So some things to skip, right? This is where I'm going to tell you to ignore career services, ignore the lovely people at the business school. Do not include an objective. You are applying to law school. Your objective is to be a lawyer. They know that. I often tell people that a law school resume is like a really nice resume from 1985. We didn't do that in 1985. We didn't list an objective. Don't list an objective. Avoid listing general skills like customer service, communication, team player. A lot of times I see resumes where people start off by saying, I'm a people person and da, 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 da. you don't want to tell them that, you want to show them those things. So you show them your customer service ability by identifying a job in customer service that you did for multiple years and maybe mentioning that you won an award at it. Or you show them that you are a good communicator by listing that paper that you got published, right? My cat is eating my leftovers back here and he's very loud. Another thing to absolutely avoid on a law school application or resume is a URL. They're going to be getting this as a PDF. They may print it out. They are not going to follow links. So if you have a publication, for example, there's no reason to give them a link to it. Give them the bibliographic information, not a link to a website. The one exception is that if you do have a LinkedIn profile, it's not a bad idea to include that. You don't want to put like the whole URL, but you can put your LinkedIn like handle. That's just nice because LinkedIn is a professional networking site and it shows that you have taken the time to create a profile there. And then you definitely want to avoid any colors other than black and white, because again, they're going to print this out or they're going to be viewing it. You just don't want colors. No fancy fonts and absolutely no pictures. No pictures. So again, the resume ends up looking kind of boring, but boring is what you want here. Okay, couple of choices that you end up making when you're writing your resume. One, as I mentioned, is how to divide up the information. Do you put leadership and service and employment all together in one sort of list, or do you break them into different components? This is really sort of almost a visual decision that you make. If you only have like one leadership position, right, or one extracurricular activity, having it just sort of hanging there by itself in its own separate category draws attention to the fact that there's only one. It's not necessarily bad that there's only one. You may have been very, very busy, but you don't want to sort of make it look lonely, right? So if that's the case, if you've only had one job or if you've only had one leadership experience, then you probably want to combine them just so that it looks more substantial, right? It's like the difference between something being $2.99 and $3. It's really not much of a difference, but somehow psychologically it's a difference. So this is about the playing with that psychology a bit. The other reason that you would definitely want to separate them, both in terms of number, if you have a lot of them, it kind of breaks up the page a little, and that's nice. But also if there's sort of a theme to one of them. So for example, if all of your volunteer work is with animals or with children, or if all of your work experience is in the military, it might make sense to have all those things clumped together. So there's a little bit of a thematic issue. There's also an issue of sort of how it looks on the page and that psychology. So I don't know about you, but the vast majority of jobs I have had, I could probably list 30 things that I was supposed to do, right? Waited tables, I do so much. What do you list, right? What are the responsibilities you want to actually include? So like I said, you always want to lead with those verbs and think about which verbs are going to be transferable. So for example, if you worked at Starbucks, right? You prepared customer drinks or custom drinks and you reheated pastries. But preparing a beverage and reheating food, while those are things you did, those are not verbs that you're going to use as a law student or a lawyer. But engaging with customers and communicating policies, engaging and communicating are things that you are going to do. Training is a transferable sort of skill, right? The reason that you lead with the verbs is to highlight the type of activity it was. And even if you are never going to be doing it in a Starbucks again, the fact that you can do that thing, you can pick up that skill and move it to another context is helpful. So think about what verbs accurately convey what you did at your job, but at the same time convey skills or strengths or activities that you are going to do as a law student and eventually as a lawyer. Does that make sense? This is hard, by the way, right? Writing a resume is not a super easy, like do it in 10 minutes sort of task. I hate to tell you, none of this is a super easy, do it in 10 minutes kind of task. Some formatting tips. So I have in fact used a sans serif font for this presentation. For online materials, sans serif actually looks better. For print materials, a serif font, right? A font like Times New Roman or Palatino. A serif is the little like little squiggle or line, little L branch at the bottom of like the B, right? Do you know what I'm talking? Well, I'll show you a serif and a sans serif font. You want to use a serif font for your resume. It looks much more professional. Encourage you to only use one font, maybe two if you are really good at graphic design and know two fonts that kind of look good together, that kind of go in a family, but certainly no more than two. Instead, if you want to distinguish between parts of the resume, between a heading and the body of a section, for example, rely on bold, on font size, on italics, things like that, because you want the whole thing to look very cohesive, right? So that the eye isn't continually readjusting. Make sure that your formatting is super consistent. So for example, if your bullet points are round little circles with blank space in the middle, always use the round little circle with the blank space in the middle. If you use the solid dot, always use the solid dot. If you use 16-point font for the heading of a section, always use 16-point font for the heading of a section. Just be very, very consistent. Again, it creates the impression that you took care with creating this document. It makes it look professional. And those things, again, psychologically have a huge effect. In addition, remember that the law is fundamentally a profession about details. Whether or not there is a comma after a word may completely change the meaning of a contract. So showing that attention to detail is really, really, it's the sort of thing that lawyers notice. They notice those changes in font. They notice those misspelled words. They notice those changes in verb tense. You're just trained to notice those things. So even though they may not seem like a big deal to you, they're going to be jarring to somebody who's trained in close reading. Okay. I do recommend using bullet points. So if you're describing your job, do it in a list of bullet points as opposed to writing a paragraph. It helps you emphasize those verbs, and it makes it just breaks up the page. We used to talk a lot about white space, and part of the reason for providing white space is so people can take notes. So you want to leave space on the resume, for example, for them to take notes in the margins, because that way they will do that and then they remember you. Now that's not as big of an issue, but it is still kind of a design point. You want some white space so that it doesn't look cluttered and chaotic. I will show you how to use tables to create item headings. It's a slamming trick that I learned, and I highly recommend it. Once you have the document looking the way you want it to look, this can be 2 pages. I wouldn't probably go on to a third unless you have an extraordinarily long work history. But 2 pages is fine. Once it looks good, right? The page breaks are where you want them to be. Things are grouped where they're supposed to be. It just looks nice and neat. Save it as a PDF, because that way when somebody at UT Law School opens the document, it's going to look the same to them as it did to you. If you open something from Microsoft Word in a different version of Word, even it can look very, very different. And all of that hard work that you put into formatting is then wasted. Okay, before I show you how to format using tables, does anybody have a question?
I was just gonna ask, like you said, we shouldn't include high school stuff, but should we include a job we had in high school, or should we just leave that off?
That is a good question. I would not include a job you had in high school unless it is a job that you continued to have afterwards. So for example, if you worked at a summer camp and you started your sophomore year in high school and you continued to do it all the way through college, then I would list those dates, right? I would, because then that shows a level of continuity and commitment that's really quite nice to show. But if you did something in high school and then you stopped doing it before you came to college, it's like the world ended when you walked onto UNT's campus. It's like, yeah, I don't know if that
Okay.
answers the question, but yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Okay.
Well, it's disappointing because it's like you do all these things in high school and really all they do is they get you into college and then they disappear. And it seems like a huge waste, but think of all the growth, right? Think of all what you learned. All
I
right.
have a question as well. It's
Yeah.
similar to Claire's. Does that apply for scholarships as well? Say, for example, senior year of high school, you got a big scholarship that lets you pay for all of college. I mean, that wasn't me, but a similar story. You wouldn't include that at all.
If it was a college scholarship, I would include it. Yes.
Okay.
Even though you got it in high school, it was a scholarship for college.
Okay.
Particularly if it was one that you like had to like maintain a certain GPA to keep or something like that. Okay. Oh, go
I
ahead.
also had a question. So I know someone mentioned a job in high school, but I had an internship at a law firm in high school, and so I would spend half the day at the law firm and half the day in high school. Do you think that would be something that you still wouldn't include, or something that just because it's so like it's so related to like law school and all that, you would include it, or what do you think?
I don't think I would. It would be something that you included in, like you wrote your personal statement about it, or you reference it in a personal statement. But I don't think I would include it on, or since you worked for so long for the firm, if you've stayed in touch with one of the attorneys, having them write one of like a third letter of recommendation. I think that's how I would try to sort of shoehorn that experience in. But yeah, again, I know I know it seems counterintuitive because it's like, wow, that is so on the nose. But they're just not admitting high school you. They're admitting college you. They're admitting adult you.
That makes sense. Thank you.
All right, so let's say that you want to create a line of text on your resume that has some breaks, right? So like you want to have a gap between working at the Subway sandwich shop and then a gap before you get to the dates, and you want the dates and this side to be nicely lined up on the right margin, but you want this side to be lined up on the left, this side to be lined up on the left margin. How do you do that? The easiest way to do that is by putting it into a table. So start by putting it into a table where you see the grid lines. And there are things you can do formatting a table with table properties. I think it's options. You can increase the margins of the cell. Let's see how this changes the look. Right, watch this table there. See, it creates space. So now there's more space before and after. There's more space between your lines. You can, with individual cells, you can change how they're oriented. So for example, if you are always going to have these kind of 3 columns, you can make this sort of this side of the resume lined up with the left margin. This is almost like having a tab, and then line this up with the right margin by choosing that option, except I unclicked it. There we go. Does that make sense? Then when you're done, right, once you have everything like lined up, all this text lined up relative to other pieces of text, the way you want it to look, you can copy this table to subsequent sections. So you used this to create your employment. You can copy this table to make another employment entry, or copy it to create a whole, for education or for service, so that you have that consistency and everything is lined up the same way. And then when you're done, back to that table properties, you click on borders and shading, and see here, this is showing you which of the lines on the table are included, and you uncheck them. Click OK, and it's gone. And no one would know that that was a table. Now it just looks like you have mad formatting skills in Microsoft Word. I love this. It really gives you a lot of flexibility. You can even, for example, if you only have 2 lines, go back to that borders and shading, and you can include just the middle, increase the weight of the line, and that creates a line in the middle like that. Right, so that again, it looks very clean, looks very neat. And then by using the tables consistently, you're always sure that your left-hand margin, the text is lined up at the same point on the left-hand margin. And if you do include some horizontal lines, that they are lined up from the same point to the same point. Does that make sense? This is probably not nearly as exciting for you as it is for me. I am kind of a nerd about these things. Okay. So I also wanted to show you, this isn't really a bad resume. Well, actually, let's look at some examples. The Harvard Law School website, their admissions page has 3 sample resumes, and I downloaded them for you so you can see what they look like. You can see that it's not just me. They really are all black and white, all text, maybe some horizontal lines, right? It's very boring formatting, but it's crisp, right? It's just very clean looking. And you can see that they are using serif fonts right all the way through, and pretty consistently the same font, using bold, all caps, slightly different font sizes, italics, in order to change, to distinguish between different parts of the resume. And everything is consistent. The education section, honors and scholarship, experience, internships, extracurricular activities. The formatting is very, very, very consistent. Sample resume 2, I was a little shocked by the border on this. That's jazzy as these things go, but apparently totally okay. Nevertheless, it is still a very plain format. This actually also surprised me because this is a sans serif font. I don't go. This is serif. You see the difference? The little tabbies. The difference between this M and this M. I know you are thinking she is bonkers if she thinks anybody cares about that. But 100% people do. I really encourage you to use the serif font. And then the third resume is a slightly different format, but not wildly different. You still have the horizontal lines, you still have the bullet points, you still have very consistent font all the way through. This one is a little bit longer and includes publications. I liked this, that the travel lists all the places that the person went. So it's not just, hey, I'm interested in travel because I watch the Travel Channel. It's travel. I've been to a bunch of different countries, right? Any questions?
I have a question for this type of resume that you're showing us now. This format, as you're saying, is okay, but say we do it, will they not think it's too cluttered?
I'm sorry, I missed the middle part of that.
Oh no, I'm saying the part where you're showing a special interest in publications, would it be fine for us to space it out, or do we have to keep it, or would you suggest we keep it in that format? Because I don't know if it will look to the admissions officer kind of cluttered, or if that's just perfectly fine the way it's shown.
The one thing that surprises me about this is that the first line of text is so close to that horizontal line. I actually would probably include a space beneath it, right? So do the line and then have a blank space and then start the text.
Yeah.
Is that what you were referencing?
Yeah, like it was, I don't know if it's fine because you're showing us different formats and it looks a little cluttered, but if that's okay, then.
I mean, I think this is probably okay. My guess is that if you did include those spaces, it might, well, I don't know, it would probably still fit on 2 pages. Yeah, I don't know. My preference would be to add the line. Good eye, love that about you. 100% I would include an additional space because but that's a good observation. It does look a little bit cluttered. It looks very scrunched up. And I think that having a space between the line and the text would make it breathe a little bit better. This is art. Okay, any other questions? Right, so then I will show you, because I had some time today. So this is a resume. This was a template that I got off of Microsoft Word. And it just makes my head hurt, right? This is kind of a modern resume. It's got the colors, it's got the little iconography over here for, the phone number and the email account. Notice that it includes that objective, which we don't want, right? To get into law school. That's your objective. It encourages you to start off with a list of skills. again, you don't want to say, I have great organizational and time management skills. Show them that by having a job where you had to manage someone's schedule, or having multiple jobs, or balancing a bunch of different things happening in your life, or having a position where you had to organize things, where you indexed, for example, or you formatted, or you copy edited. You want to show those skills. Some of the other things that I purposefully planted in here to make it clearly problematic. If you do not already have an email account that you can show the world, now is the time to get one. Get a very professional, like your name and maybe a couple of numbers, or your name with some underlines, or something very, very, very boring, and make that your email account. It doesn't have to be your primary email account. It just has to be your professional email account. I also see we've got like various formatting choices, capitalized server, but babysitter is lowercase. My teachers love me and I worked really hard. That's not helpful. Included, stuff from high school. But let's look at the experience in particular. So I listed that I was a server at Denny's. I help people choose what kind of toast to have with their breakfast, refill ketchup bottles, enter orders in the POS, and mop all floors at the end of shift. That is 100% what I did when I worked at Denny's. Now, babysitter, did that too. I watch babies, toddlers, and older children, get them ready for school, make sure they get to after school activities, grocery shop, and cook dinner for the family. That doesn't sound bad, but how can we take that and make it sound even better, you ask? The answer is no. Okay. Right. So now I'm a server at Denny's, right? Note that I have indicated how many hours a week I work. Engage in professional and personal customer service, managing a section of approximately 25 diners at a time. So engage, right? Like that verb. Managed, love that verb. Professional, right? Indicate that there were a lot of people, right? It emphasizes the fact that there's like some multitasking involved in this. Organize and prepare for later shifts and maintain the cleanliness and safety of the dining room. So instead of saying, I refilled ketchup bottles and rolled silverware, I organized and prepared for later shifts, right? So it emphasizes the skills that I was using as opposed to the specific things that I did. Instead of a babysitter, I am a childcare provider. That may seem silly, but that's what I would do. Coordinated transportation and schedules for 2 families, 1 of 3 children and 1 of 2 children. Supervised children's activities, assisted with homework and maintained routines, planned meals, stocked kitchen, and prepared meals that met the dietary needs of a gluten intolerant child. These 2 job descriptions are describing exactly the same positions, right? But they're emphasizing them in a way that that they're transferable, right? Coordinated, schedules, supervising, assisting, maintaining, planning, preparing, right? Those are verbs that are not limited to the childcare context. Those are things that you will do down the road as a managing partner of a firm, as a supervisor at a position, supervising paralegals. These are jobs, these are tasks that you will perform and skills that you can use that you are already using. So it's not a question of having a fancy job, right? I know a lot of students are freaked out because they're like, what am I going to say that's going to impress a law school? I've worked food service for 4 years. Man, anybody who's worked food service can tell you it is hard work. And you do have to use skills that you will use later in your life. And the trick is to identify what those skills are, the skills you have and are already using, and illustrate them on your resume. Okay? Questions?
I had a question. It's not directly about what you just went over, but for the publication stuff. So I have my friend, he's in a completely different university, but he writes articles for a sports magazine, and sometimes I help him out. Would that be something that I could include on there, or is it, or would you just suggest stuff that's for like our school? Since I don't go to that school. I'm not like, the only thing I do is help him out, and like I write parts of them too.
Does he give you a byline?
Not right now, but he could if he wanted to.
He should.
He should?
Have him give you a byline.
Uh-huh.
And absolutely, it's actually, the selling point there is not only are you writing, which is obviously an incredibly valuable skill, but you are co-authoring something. So that's illustrating that teamwork that you can't just say you have, you want to show you have. And it's showing that you're collaborating with somebody outside of your immediate environment, right? Which shows an ability to network, to maintain relationships. So I think that's a great thing to include on your resume. The trick is going to be explaining what it is you did. Has anybody ever done, has anybody ever worked under the table, like worked for cash, right? You can't really put that on your resume, right? Because it's like you didn't really have that job. What you're doing right now without having the byline, without having some sort of formal relationship with him in this endeavor, it makes it harder to put on your resume because I don't know what you would call yourself, right? If you can be a co-author, that's awesome. If you can be an editor for him, right? If you can, he's willing to identify you, not even necessarily in the articles themselves, but to kind of almost formalize the position so that you are providing editorial services for him, then yeah, you can absolutely list it. So the problem is not that it's at another institution. The problem is going to be defining what it is you did.
Wouldn't in sports journalism, they also do research? So researching?
Yeah. So if you did research, so sure. Yeah, I think you could probably, you just have to come up with like kind of a name for what it is that you did. And then, your bullet points, you're researching, editing,
Sports journalism.
right. But sports journalism is like a field. Like, what is your job within sports journalism? Maybe you could call yourself like a developmental editor. This is where LinkedIn becomes super valuable because you can see what jobs people have and call yourself those things. Yeah, so like I said, the problem here is it's not really a problem in the sense that it's not like an insurmountable problem. I think the trick is going to be figuring out how to describe what you did in a way that is both accurate and feels systematic. Not just like something you did, because you called up your friend in the middle of the night and he happened to be working on a story and so you helped him brainstorm, right? Like that doesn't have the sort of level of formality that you would want to put on a resume. But 100%, if you can figure out how to phrase it properly, the fact that it was at a different institution is not a problem.
All right, that makes sense.
Yeah. Sports consultant. I like that one too. Yeah.
Oh, I had a question.
Yes.
Now that you brought up LinkedIn, should we, the subtext line underneath like one's name on a resume where we put like email, phone number, and then like the city we're in. Should we also include our LinkedIn? Like, would that be recommended?
Yeah, like I said, that's the one like sort of social media handle I would encourage you to list.
Okay.
Probably don't want to list your Twitter handle. You definitely don't want to list your Instagram channel or your TikTok channel or any of that stuff. I don't think, unless maybe you're going into like, well, no, not at this point in your career. But LinkedIn, yes, because it is a professional networking site, and you want it, before you include it, you do want to make sure it's something you want them to see, right? So make sure you're happy with the way your LinkedIn profile looks. That's actually probably a whole nother conversation about cleaning up your social media before you submit your applications. Make sure that you're not saying things that you're going to regret when you're nominated for the Supreme Court in a few years. And make sure that everything is in a position right now that, for example, if they're on Facebook and they look you up, right? Are they going to be able to see your profile? And if so, what are they going to see? So you do want to kind of clean everything up. But once if you have it the way you want it, then absolutely include your LinkedIn profile. That I would do.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
We're going to do a workshop in a couple of weeks about LinkedIn too. So I encourage everybody to come back.
All right, I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay. So last semester I had tutored my cousin in math for 2 months at a different university. So could I include that on my resume, or I shouldn't include that on my resume?
Did you do it pretty regularly?
Yes, we did it for 2 months straight. I was over there every week. Every week I was over there. Sometimes like multiple days out of the week I would be over there.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would 100% include that. Again, it's like if you went home for Thanksgiving and you helped them with their homework, then no. But if it was something that you did regularly for a couple of months, I would absolutely list yourself as a tutor. And you might want to specify whether it was volunteer or paid. So like if you did it just on a volunteer basis, you might specify that you are a volunteer tutor. Does not take away from what you did at all. It just adds kind of a level of transparency. And then I would, be specific about what the class was. Like, was it Algebra 2 or was it calculus or whatever? Again, it just gives you, it just gives that kind of level of clarity. And I would specify that it was at a college course.
Mm-hmm.
It would indicate how many hours a week you worked.
Okay. So what if so I wouldn't know how to word it. Like, I didn't charge her, but I wasn't like, I didn't necessarily just volunteer. Like, she called me and said, "Hey Tracy, I'm taking these math classes. Can you tutor me?" And I said, okay. But then like when she tries to pay me, I didn't take it. So it's not technically like volunteering, because I didn't just say, "Oh, let me just help you," and I didn't like just approach her first. But then again, it's like it wasn't paid because I didn't like charge her. So how would I like put that?
Here we're using volunteer as an adjective as opposed to paid, not volunteer as a verb like you volunteered.
Okay, gotcha.
If you offered, it's just you did it without pay. And like I said, that doesn't take away from what you did at all. If anything, it probably shows that you are a good soul. But yeah, I would absolutely list that, because that's being able to like to teach somebody something, particularly something that they're struggling with. It is a tremendous gift, and I would want them to know you have that.
So would it be good to list her final grades in there as well?
I was just about to say, and if she got an A, 100% indicate, that like you brought her average up from a this to the that, or yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, contact contact your cousin.
So so is it good to put on there that I tutored a cousin, or would I just put I tutored an individual?
Tutored a person.
Tutored a person? Okay. Got it. All right. Thank you.
That's not lying.
I have a question. So I'm a pharmacy technician and you have to take a test to get certified. So would that be like a skill or do I put that under my job? And then if I become a senior pharmacy technician at my job, would I indicate that or how would I go about that?
Those are both great questions. Yeah, if you had to become certified or licensed for a position that you held, absolutely list that. I think I would probably list it underneath the job itself. It would be different if you were applying for a job as a pharmacy technician, because does that make sense? Because then you'd really want to highlight, like, I have this certification.
Mhm.
Law school, the fact that you have it is not necessarily, it's not a skill that they're going to be drawing on at some point.
Mhm.
You absolutely want to indicate that this was like a licensure thing, right? That you went through that process. And if you become a senior technician, you can actually, if it's for the same employer, you can have the employer line at the top and then have two different job titles, right? Technician or technician?
Yeah, technician.
Technician and then senior technician, and the dates for both.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, because that's a promotion. We love that. That means you not only did your job, but you did it well. Any other questions?
So
Um,
including, oh, sorry,
Oh, sorry, you go.
including merit raises, but not writing the amount of those, but merit raises, can we say qualified for merit raises 5 years in a row?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah. Yeah. I think probably you don't need to specify the amount, but indicating that, you kind of went through an evaluative process and were identified as somebody who deserved, it's like getting an award. It's better because it's money. So yeah, I would 100% include that.
I was gonna ask about like what types of volunteer things we should include. Should we only include anything that's like a longer term volunteering? Or because I used to do like one-off things like that, my job would just be like, hey, we're gonna all do a volunteer day. Like, is that something that you think we would also want to include, or only if it's kind of a repeated volunteering?
So that's tricky. I'm going to tell you what a guy from UT said in the fall, which is if you just like went and did Habitat for Humanity one day, don't include it. Particularly if it was something where you didn't go and seek out the opportunity, but instead it was sort of like, hey, and then we're all going to go get a beer afterwards. But if you did something like on a like, I know UNT has, what's the big give, the big, does anybody have any idea what I'm talking about? There's like a day when everybody does
Our
silent.
Texas Giving Day, or it's probably the service day.
Yeah, it's there's some like big event. It's like the big day or something. We probably haven't had it since any of you have been in college because of COVID. But if it's like something that you did like regularly every year, or if you did Adoption Day, I don't know if you guys know what Adoption Day is, but like if you worked at an Adoption Day event regularly, then I would include that. But if it's just sort of ad hoc, I don't think I would.
Okay, yeah, because one of the things I was thinking of was like it was like a dog adoption thing where we would volunteer. So it was like, one weekend, but it was like several years of it.
Yeah.
So that would be something to include.
Yeah. I think if there's consistency in it, right? Like the fact that it's only once a year, if it's a once a year event, then what else are you going to do? Right. So then, yeah, I think if there's consistency there, then I think it's okay. I think one of the ways to think of this is, what is it that they are going to, like, they don't necessarily care that you did volunteer work because they care that you did volunteer work. They do a little bit, right? They want you to be a good human being, and volunteer work is something good people often do. But really, what these things are conveying, like I said, they do not care that you are good at waiting tables, because you're not going to wait tables for them. But they do care that you have time management skills and organizational skills and interpersonal skills. They do care that you can juggle multiple things, that you have values, that you have a level of commitment to things that matter to you. Right? So kind of be thinking about, what is the moral of the story? What is it that they learn about you from these things that you're putting on your resume? That is, I think, a good way to identify the things that you want to include.
Dr. Watson, for older students, how far back do we need to go? Because I mean, I have 28 years of work experience, not all positive, but and how do you smooth over those ones that didn't go so well?
That is tough. So I think what I would encourage you to do, especially if you have, like, let's say you worked as a waitress, right? A server. I'm old. As a server at like a bunch of different restaurants, right? You can maybe kind of tweak the formatting, and instead of listing it by employer, list it by job, right? Like, I was a server at these restaurants, right? Or worked as a server, various restaurants as the employer, just to sort of, and use those sorts of entries more to explain where the time went, right? So maybe you have like 3 jobs that really utilized your skills well, where you really had a chance to do the sorts of things that you're going to do for the rest of your life. Again, maybe not in the same context, but you utilize those skills that you want to market yourself as having. Does that make sense? So you include those as kind of bigger chunks. Like, for 2 years, I was the apartment manager for the whatever group. And then you have an entry after that that says various restaurants, waited tables, hostess, cooked, right? And kind of just use that as a placeholder for time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so like my paramedic certification, I'm obviously no longer a paramedic. I can write on there the, beginning of when I was certified and then when I ended. And then with my TCOL certification as a police officer, I can put that it's still current, although I do plan on letting it drop. Still include those, right?
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you had, I'm thinking of a much spottier employment record. So 28 years, if you worked for multiple police departments, you can probably sort of summarize, like, from this date to this date, I worked as a licensed peace officer, and then identify the individual jurisdictions for which you worked, and then have kind of an overall sort of bullet point list of the various types of tasks you did, the various types of responsibilities you had. So yeah, I think especially if you have like a couple of sort of professional type jobs, right? Like something specialized, like being a peace officer, I think I would probably lump them together. If you move
Perfect.
around a lot. If you didn't move around a lot, then list them all individually.
Yeah, I didn't move around a lot, but okay, yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. Like I said, there's a little bit of an art to this. Like there's not always a one size fits all. I think the key is what can you do to emphasize the skills you used and to keep it to about 2 pages. And gloss over the stuff that you don't, that doesn't serve you.
So is there someone here at UNT or on campus for undergrad that would be able to look over these resumes as
That-
we're developing them? Oh, you, okay.
Yeah, so if you're applying for a job, right? Like if you're applying for anything other than law school, honestly, you probably want to go to career services and have them look at the resume, because they're going to be able to tell you what an employment resume looks like and what you should be hitting on that. But if you're using this resume to apply to law school, I'm the one that you want to look at it. You certainly show it to other people as well, especially for proofreading and stuff, but I'm happy to look at it. That goes for all of you. For my job. Any other questions?
I have one. So excuse me. So at one of my jobs, I started when I was in high school, but during my last year there, I was out of high school, and I got promoted to a shift manager. But I know you said don't include high school or high school work experience, but I could not like highlight that I have like leadership experience without. So I don't want to say on there from this time to this time I was. So I just put from this time to that time I was the manager, or do I just ignore the high school part of it?
I would indicate that you worked for the company from date to date, and then manager from this date to this date.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, if you have that continuity from high school to post high school, then it's totally fine to include it.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Then emphasize what you did as manager, because that's probably going to be more transferable anyway.
Okay. Okay, got it. Thank you.
All right. Well, go ahead.
I had a quick question. I know we already touched over this about the whole volunteering thing, but I know some campus organizations are service orientated, and with that, you usually do different volunteering events for different organizations within the campus group. So instead of trying to list every volunteer service we've done, is it okay if we put the main organization that we joined on campus and say it's service orientated and put some of the work we've done for that club?
That would be preferable. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Because that, I mean, first of all, that shows that, like, again, that it wasn't just something you did on a whim, but it was something you intentionally set out to do. So that's actually kind of a bonus. But yeah, like if you joined like APO or something like that, I would list the organization and then, fundraised for blah, 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 raised X number of dollars for St. Jude's Children's Hospital, or, like hit some highlights of the things that you did. But use the service organization as kind of the header. Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so again, if you have a resume for law school that you want me to look at, I'm happy to do that. I do ask that you make an appointment and then you can send it to me in advance, but the appointment gives me kind of a clear deadline for when to have it ready for you. Make sure that it doesn't fall through the cracks. Thank you again. If you think of other questions, you can always shoot me an email, and keep your eyes open for the next workshop.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Thank you.
Thank you,